Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and today I'm going to show you how to animate a sleepy animal by making the back move as well as adding some little Z's or anything else you want to write around the character. So grab your drawing tools and let's get started. Now before we actually jump into the animation itself, I do have just a few little tips on how to set up your file, especially if you're working in Procreate. So we're going to look over those really quickly. If you don't feel the need to have those tips, if you're familiar with the animation settings in Procreate, you can just skip to the next chapter, which is going to be the animation itself. Now this sleepy cat illustration is from a video that I posted 30 minutes ago, so if you want to go ahead and follow exactly with what I will be doing here, feel free to go and check out that video first and just draw your own sleepy cat. Otherwise, once more, you can follow the same steps and apply them to whatever other illustration you might have in which there's a sleeping animal. Now I will be working in Procreate to do this animation, but you could work in a different software as long as you have a frame-by-frame animation tool. If you are working in Procreate though, there is one thing to keep in mind, which is whenever you are working in a canvas, you have a limited amount of layers depending on a few factors like which iPad you're using as well as the canvas size you're working in. And because we're creating an animation, we're going to need multiple layers because without getting into all the details of animation, the way frame-by-frame animation works is just like a flip book. So you know those flip books when you have an illustration or a drawing and then the next page there's a slight difference, next page another slight difference, and then when you flip through the pages you see all those differences compound to create the movement. Well, we're going to do the same thing here in Procreate, but instead of having pages of paper, we're going to have the layers, and those are what are going to have the slight differences that are going to create the movement. So all of that to say here, we need at least 45 layers in our file to create this animation. Now the way to check how many layers you have available within one canvas size is really easy. You're just going to go in this wrench icon menu here. In the canvas submenu, you're going to pick canvas information at the very bottom of the list. Then from there, we're going to pick layers right here. And if you look at maximum layers, that's going to tell you how many layers you can have in your file. So in my case, I have 246. That's definitely more than 45. But if in your case, the number was less than 45, not a problem. What you can do is make your canvas smaller. And so to do that, you would still be in the wrench icon menu here, canvas submenu, but this time you would pick the first option, crop and resize. Now in the crop and resize option or menu, you're going to go in the settings option right here. And you are going to make sure this little link is activated between the two pixel numbers because that's going to keep your ratio, the dimension of your canvas, the same. Now you're also going to activate this resample canvas toggle right here. And as you can see, whenever I change something, there's this little thing that pops up really quickly at the top and it just goes right out very fast. So it's hard to notice, but keep an eye out on this section of the screen. You're going to see what I mean. You're going to see whenever you make a change, you're going to see how many layers you now have available. So let's say I go with 2000 pixels instead. You can see now I have 258. So in your case, you would decrease the size of your canvas until you have at least 45 as your maximum number right here. Great, so now that we know we have enough layers, now that we've set up our file, we're going to just organize our layers really quickly so that we can then create the animation itself. So what I mean by that is if we were to go ahead, well actually let's go ahead and do that. If we go and activate Animation Assist, which is the animation feature within Procreate, we can do that by going in the wrench icon menu here at the top. In the canvas submenu, there is Animation Assist, the second option, which has a toggle. So if you activate that toggle here, it's going to give you this new menu here at the bottom, which is the animation menu. But it's not just going to do that, it's going to completely, seemingly at least, mess up your illustration. So there are a few things that we need to tell Procreate before we can actually start creating the animation itself. And those things are, we need to tell Procreate what is the background and what is going to be animated. So in my case here, in the case of this illustration, my background is going to be everything that is not the cat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all those layers, I'm going to select them and create one big group with those layers or merge all of those layers together until I have either one background layer or one background group. Both would work just the same, but we need to make sure we don't have just a bunch of loose layers like this. So if you followed along the illustration part of the tutorial, that means we are going to group the book's details, the books themselves, the cup's details, the cup, the ground shadow, the wall shadow, and in my case also have an example, but that doesn't count, And as you notice, you can just select multiple layers in Procreate by swiping them towards the right with one finger. And then once you have everything selected, we're just going to tap Group. We're going to collapse the group by tapping the little arrow next to the check mark. And we are going to rename the group to Background. Now we also need to tell Procreate, okay, this group is the background. We don't want it to move, we just want it to stay put in the whole animation. So the way to do that is to go in the animation menu here at the bottom. You're going to notice you have a few different squares, and those squares are what we called frames. So that's essentially little pages of your flipbook. Now you should be able to see a little preview of the different frames, so just go ahead and locate the one that looks like your background. It should be the one the most on the left. So if you go ahead and tap on that, you're going to see you have frame options, and you should have something called background, so a little toggle that you could activate. If you don't see it, which I don't, there is one reason for that. It's a very simple fix. It is because you have something between your background color, so that layer that comes within any Procreate canvas, and your background group. So in my case, I have the example here, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. I don't need it. But now if I go back on my background frame in the animation menu, I'm going to have this background toggle available, which I can now turn on. And you can see now I have this kind of blue little frame around the background frame, and that means it's not going to move, it's going to stay put. That being said, if I was to tap play now, it would alternate between the cat and the cat details, which is definitely not what I want. So if you have the same, again, illustration structure as I do, you can either merge those two layers together by squishing them with two fingers, or you could create another group as well. I'm just going to merge them because I don't feel the need to move them independently. Now, I'm also going to delete my sketch here just to keep the file organized as much as possible. But at this point, if we were to click play, nothing should move. Great. So now that we have the file set up and the layers organized, we're going to start the animation itself. And in this video, I'm going to show you essentially how to have two separate animations going at the same time. So one animation is going to be the back here expanding and contracting like the cat was breathing, and then another animation, which is going to be on a different time frame, is going to be some little Z's kind of floating above its head, again just to amplify that sleeping vibe. And so the way I like to approach kind of combine animations like this is to create what I call cycles of animation. And we're going to start by just creating one cycle, which is going to be exclusively focusing on the movement of the back. So the animation itself for the back is going to be super easy. We're just going to, again, lift up the back. So we're going to start with this base state, the original illustration. We're going to leave it like that. And then we're going to create a copy of this cat layer so that we can start creating the movement. So go ahead and open up your layers, and then to create a copy of your cat layer, you're just going to swipe it towards the left with one finger, and you're going to select the duplicate option right here. Now from there, make sure your top copy is the one selected. You're going to go in your adjustment panel right here at the top, and you're going to pick the liquify option at the bottom. Now liquify is a really powerful tool. Here we're just going to barely scratch the surface of what you can do. But there are a few things that you need to make sure you select in the settings. The main thing is really just making sure you are using push as your, shape setting right here. So the option right on the left. The other options are just going to be more how intense the effect, that push effect, is going to be. So it doesn't really matter a whole lot. The size does matter though, and we're going to have to test that out because that's going to depend on a few different things like the size of your canvas, the size of the element you're trying to move. But let's say I go with around 35 for now. We want to find a size that is going to allow us to push the back upwards in a way that doesn't look like a bump on the back, but also doesn't come in and then also move stuff like the ear. So we want a size that is just big enough to cover most of the back, but doesn't spill out of that. So let's say I go ahead and try. So in my case, something like 55 looks pretty good. If I undo, I can see that all I'm moving is really just the back. And so what we're going to do here is we're just going to move the top of the back upwards a tiny little bit. So if I go ahead and undo, you can see it's really not too big of a change. You want something roughly in that same vein. Now we're going to repeat this one more time. So again, just selecting the top copy of the cat layer we have, swapping it towards the left with one finger, and then selecting duplicate. And with that new top copy, we're going to go back to the liquify tool. So in the adjustment panel here, at the bottom, liquify, we should still have the same size, so you don't have to play with that anymore. We're going to once more lift up the top of the back a tiny little bit. So at this stage, if we were to go ahead and press play, we should see that our cat is breathing. Now, it is breathing in a little bit of a weird way, and the main reason for that is the order of the frame, so the order of the layers that we have going on, and the order of the animation. We're starting with the back being low, then medium, and then tall, and then we're going straight back to low. So to have a smoother transition from high to low, we're going to create a copy of this medium back. So you can just go ahead and tap on this frame right here in the middle of the three cats, select duplicate, then take the copy and put it to the right. So at this stage, you should have 4 frames going from low, medium, high, medium, and it's going to loop and get back to low. So if I was to go ahead and tap play, it's going to look much smoother now. Now, there are also other settings that we can play with to make the animation even smoother. And to access those settings, very easy, you can just tap on the settings option right here in the animation menu. The most important one, or at least the only one that you absolutely need to set for this animation, is this top section right here. In this top section right here, you have 3 options, and those options dictate how, or the order in which Procreate is going to play through the different frames. And so here we want a loop, meaning we want to start from the first layer, going to the second, the third, the fourth, and then going back to the first. So make sure you have a loop selected here. Otherwise, these options are more of a personal preference. Now, frame per second is important for a lot of different reasons, especially if you were to create a longer animation, or if you were to import this animation in a video that you're editing, for example. But in the case of this animation, if we're supposing that we're just going to use it to share it on social media, you can pretty much just consider frame per second as the speed of your animation. Again, that is a huge generalization, and that is not the definition of frame per second at all, but for the purpose of this animation in this software, it is. If you do want to have the proper definition of frame per second, please go ahead and check out the video description below. I'm going to write it down so you can maybe get a better feel for it. But again, in this context, it's really just going to be affecting the speed of the animation. So for example, if I was to go with more frames per second, 28, you can see it goes really quickly. And if I was to bring it down, you can see it goes slower. So that is a personal preference. I'm going to set mine to 4. Now, all of these other options right here are not going to affect the final animation, but they are going to affect the preview, or how you can work on the animations. So for example here, onion skin frame and onion skin opacity is going to be a really helpful feature when you're working on animations that you need to redraw. Here we use liquify, but there are some animations that you need to change the movement and redraw a part of your character. And so onion skin frames is going to allow you to see the layers before and after the one that you're working on currently, so you can have a better idea of where to redraw the different elements. So in the case of what we're doing here, it really doesn't matter much. I like to usually set mine to 2 or 3, and I like to keep the opacity around 40%. But again, that doesn't affect the final animation, so you can just play with those settings and see what you like. So all of that to say, what we did here is we created the first cycle, so the first thing that is going to be looping in our animation. Now, if you need more time to work on smoothing that movement, feel free to pause the video here. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the next chapter, in which we're going to create the secondary animation. So in my case, a little Z's floating above the head. Great. Now, there are so many different ways of organizing your file and your layers whenever you want to have compound animations. But the way I like to do it is to work in what I call cycles. And so right now this would be one cycle, and we're going to rename all the layers within our cycle to their number. So this is frame 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're just going to go ahead and rename the layers accordingly. So to rename a layer in Procreate, super easy. You can just tap on the layer, and select the rename option here at the top. So 1 at the bottom, 2, 3, and 4 at the top. And then once we have those layers renamed, it's going to be really easy to create additional cycles and then create that extra animation throughout the different cycles. So we're going to duplicate the layers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then reorganize them so that they are above in the list to essentially have a new cycle after this one that we already have. So we can just duplicate the layers first. And then we can reorganize them by dragging them around so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in my case here, I'm really going to keep this secondary animation super simple. I'm just going to have some Z's floating around, but you could draw really whatever else you want. And I'm going to draw those Z's on a separate layer to the cat, just so you can get a better feel on how those layers work in relationship to the original animation. Now there's one tiny little thing that I'm going to do here which might be a little bit confusing, which is I'm going to skip the first frame, so the very first one where the cat is still. I'm not going to have any Z there. I'm going to just keep that a little bit more still. So that might be a little bit confusing, but otherwise the rest of the animation is going to be very fluid. So what I mean by that is I'm going to start my secondary animation above the second frame of my first cycle. So I'm going to create a new layer above that, which as you're going to notice is going to make our animation look all weird. And that is because now this layer is considered as a frame, which is not really what we want. I want to have it on a separate layer because in my mind it's a separate part of the animation, but I want it to be on the same frame so it doesn't just toggle between the cat and the Z. I want them both to happen together. So to fix that issue, all we're going to do is we're going to group that new layer and the frame on which the cat is the second one. So selecting both and creating a group. And then we're going to rename this new group to 2. So this becomes our second frame in the animation. From there though, you can just go back on your new layer and draw a small Z above your cat's head. Now I want this Z to stay the same throughout the rest of the cycle, so I'm just going to duplicate my Z layer, get it out of the 2 group, and create a new group with the Z and the layer 3. And you guessed it, we're going to rename this new group to 3. And same thing here, I'm just going to duplicate that Z once more, getting out of the group 3, and create a new group with a 4 so that I can finish up this breathing cycle. So if I was to go ahead now and tap play, we can see it's going to start with nothing, and then there's going to be a little Z popping up at one point. Now we're going to repeat this with these other layers that we have for the second cycle. So we're going to create a new layer to create that new little Z. And this time I'm going to start with the first frame because I don't want to go back to no Z's at all. So just a new layer right above number 1. Slightly bigger, slightly higher. And then we're going to group these 2 layers. And you could just rename this group 1 if you want, but whenever I start a new cycle, I like to mention that in the name. So I would write here cycle 2 because this is the second cycle, and then I'm going to write -1 so I know it's the first frame in that cycle. Otherwise, it's going to be the same thing that we did for cycle 1, meaning we're just going to duplicate that Z, getting out of the group, and putting it above the next frame, so that we can then create a new group, renaming that group to the number of the frame it is, and just repeating that until we're done with the other cycle. So if I go ahead and tap on the little arrow right here to collapse my groups, we're going to see we have 1, which is the cat with nothing on it, 2, 3, 4, then cycle 2, on which the Z is slightly bigger, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you can repeat these steps and create however many cycles you need so that your secondary animation is complete. So in my case, I'm going to repeat it with at least one more cycle so that I can have a third bigger Z, a little bit higher than the other two. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to duplicate, again, just the different cat layers I have, put them above the list so that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 once more. And then I'm going to create a new layer above the first frame of this cycle. Draw a bigger Z, or Z, depending on where you're from in the world. And then I'm going to group these two layers to create my cycle 3, frame 1. Otherwise, same thing, just duplicating that Z. And grouping layers to create frames. So now if I go ahead and tap play, we're going to see we're going to go through the different cycles. The cat is going to keep breathing, but we're going to have a secondary animation on top with the Z's. So feel free to pause the video here if you need a little bit more time to work on your cycles. Otherwise, I'm going to show you how you can export your animation so you can share it on social media. And it is super easy. All you have to do is go in the wrench icon menu right here at the top. You're going to pick the share submenu, of course. But instead of going in share image, which is what we usually do, we're going to go in share layers, which sounds kind of weird, but if you go at the bottom of that section, you're going to see we have a bunch of different animated options. And there's obviously a time and place for all of those. The one I prefer to use for social media is animated MP4 right here, so the second to last option. And all you have to do here is really just making sure the frames per second you have here is the same as the one you had in the settings. So in my case it was 4, so that's all good. And then from there you can just tap on export. And you're going to be able to pick where you want to save your animation. So I like to just select save video because that's going to save the animation as a regular video in the camera roll, which means from there I can just use it as a regular video and post it wherever I want. If you enjoyed this video and want more animation tutorials, I highly recommend you check out this playlist because I have a bunch more videos for you. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I post every Saturday with some bonus videos on Tuesday. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.